You'll see that Matthew has a beautiful background with spirituality and now doing business consulting. So it's really right in the crosshairs of everything that we're trying to do with Lumen. So we came up with this idea that in 2025, we're going to do more business topics. And many of you have participated in a survey, and that's coming together. We'll refine that. But the first thought earlier this year was, let's do a pilot and see how that works. And so we selected June. So the circle materials, everything this month is on DEI, and it worked really well that DEI is one of the topics that Matthew talks about. So it's really hand in glove to have him on our national speaker series the same month that we're going to have that in our leadership circle. So should be a great month. And so again, we welcome and thank Matthew for being part of this. So the topic officially is DEI. That is not DEI. And let me read you Matthew's bio here, and we'll jump into it. Mr. Matthew Brackett is a coach, advisor, and educator regarding a perennial human experience, the use of power, influence, and leadership. He is passionate about humanity, healthy leadership, and human potential. Mr. Brackett has 30-plus years of experience in leadership positions, education, and development in some of the largest and most complex global organizations in the world. He has broad international and intercultural experience in leadership, educational, and consulting roles in Italy, Ireland, England, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, leading teams representing all continents. He also served as Special Staff Officer and Chaplain in the United States Navy and Marine Corps. Mr. Brackett is a professional certified coach with the International Coaching Federation, has his master's in psychology of leadership from Pennsylvania State University, and specialized degree in human development from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Italy. Warm welcome for Mr. Matthew Brackett.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Lumen. Thank you, Father Daniel. Great to see everybody. So this is DE&I that is not DE&I, and I'll explain that in a bit. But our approach is how a holistic and wholesome approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and at the end of that we can put belonging, is aligned with Catholic social teaching. There's a lot of noise out there around, that these are contradictory topics. So I'm going to do that difficult task of trying to bring these together. By no means do I expect to offer you an exhaustive teaching on DE&I, because it's a complex and broad topic, nor on Catholic social teaching. But I'm going to try to bring those together. So what should you expect during our time together? During our time, I will strive to make a case that diversity, equity, and inclusion, when properly framed, and properly framed meaning from our Catholic anthropology, Christian anthropology, and when properly framed in a holistic and wholesome manner, has a very effective place in the workplace and in society. And secondly, that these principles do not contradict, but rather are aligned with Catholic and Christian social teaching. This topic, as you well know, is like a minefield, where oftentimes we have to feel like we have to tiptoe around. I will try not to tiptoe around my message, because if I do so, I will lose clarity, and that would be a disservice to all of you. As Catholic business executives, what I would like you to think about as we approach this topic is how you can make DE&I an effective instrument for improved culture, for a greater sense of the dignity of the human person and the dignity of work, how DE&I initiatives could help you better select talent, and how it could also better serve your bottom line. Essentially, how can you leverage a healthy and wholesome DE&I for good in your business and in your organization? And therefore, how can you frame and position DE&I for the end results that you want to achieve? You want to improve dignity in the workplace? All right, how can I use DE&I to do that? I want to improve talent recruitment and talent selection. How can I use DE&I to do that? We want to improve the bottom line. How can I use DE&I to do that? We want well-being. We want to improve well-being in the workplace and also the sense of belonging. Well, how can I use DE&I to help us do that? And then the mainstream DE&I, it's sort of like, it makes people think that it has to be presented in one way. And that's what causes a lot of rejection towards it. It doesn't have to be presented in one. And really the mainstream way of presenting it, I think it's shifting, but it hasn't been really helpful. And that's why when I use our title, DEI that is not DEI. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion that is not divisive, exclusive, and ideological. But rather, it is built on, there's another DEI acronym, it's built on dignity, equality and empathy, there's a double E there, and innovation. So there can be, and I'll repeat that in a second, but there can be a tendency in the American Catholic circles and the American conservative circles that reject everything about DEI because if it's liberal, because it's Marxist, or it's categorized as woke. We'll define what woke means later on, but now those are the things that are being thrown out there. And in my view, we risk throwing away something that's very valuable, a valuable asset and a tool that can do good, and even, yes, a tool that can evangelize. Now, I do realize that when I talk about this, I'm going up against some brilliant minds that may seemingly teach the opposite. We can think of Jordan Peterson, we can think of Bishop Barron, a man named James Lindsay. I'll put these names and other resources in the comment section at the end. So I'm not, and I understand where they're coming from. So I'm not really when they approach this topic, they're approaching it when it's erroneously framed versions that are Marxist, that are socialist, neo-Marxist tendencies. So that's whenever they talk about the way, that's what they're addressing. So my approach is a little bit different. So I don't mean to contradict what they say. I just want to come at it from a different angle, because as we all know, that those are very brilliant minds. And who am I to go up against them? I'm just coming at it from a different angle. So DEI that is not diversity, equity, inclusion, that is not divisive, not exclusive, and not ideological, but rather built on the principles of dignity, equality and empathy, and innovation. That's why I say the DEI that is not DEI, but that is all about DEI. That can sound very confusing, but now you know why I say that. So we'll explore these terms more in depth in order to make a case that holistic and wholesome approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and justice and belonging, because you've all seen out there, it's DEIB, DEIJ, there's different things, and really that justice and belonging, in my view, is really important because that's sort of the umbrella principle that all of us can fall under. So I participated in the program with it's called the Institute for Diversity Certification, where they have two certification programs. One is for a certified diversity professional, which is really someone who's on the ground in an organization, not really developing, but what's the word? They're working in laying out all diversity DEI practices in an organization. So it's certified diversity professional. And then they have another certification called Certified Diversity Executive. And that's the course that I did, which is more about strategic, more about the bigger picture on the principles. And during that, I became close to Dr. Delmar Lee, who is in charge of training and education for that institute. And I have to say, I have great things to say about the Institute for Diversity and then the programs that they offer. So Dr. Delmar Lee, he does a lot of work, not only with the Institute for Diversity, but a lot of companies and universities. And in a conversation with me, and he kind of liked my approach. So he affirmed that the DE&I space, and I want to quote him here, DE&I space was hijacked by the wrong people that have done a great disservice to the meaning of and the intent of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So this is from a man who's an expert in the field, a man of color. So I really took that with a lot of weight of what he said, and I continue to quote him. So a lot of this was done at university levels, as you well know, and in the academic world. And you all know that Marxist, socialist, communist trends have been present in many public and private universities for decades now. So now, can DE&I be framed in a Marxist or a neo-Marxist manner? Of course it can, and oftentimes it is. And that's what causes the divisiveness, the friction, the tension. Another thing that doesn't help the case is that the DE&I also became a great business opportunity. When a lot of social problems, racial problems begin to blow up in our country, highly inadequate professionals stepped in to fill a need that organizations were looking to satisfy. And so it was a business opportunity. They said, oh, we can make a lot of money off this and deliver poor content. So a lot of inadequate professionals, in my view, stepped into the space. Just last year alone, $10.9 billion was spent on DE&I training and education in the United States. And so this isn't about getting on the bandwagon. And I understand, in some of the conservative or Catholic circles, there's this resistance. So yes, it's not about getting on the bandwagon and doing it just for the sake of doing it because it's in style. And if you don't, you will get sued. And aside, actually, you probably have a better chance of getting sued if you have poor and unthoughtful implementation of DE&I than not having it at all. It's put a lot of companies in very problematic situations when they didn't think it through. So this is about the intentional use of tools and methods to achieve how D&I can be an ally, an asset, and of value to our company. And remember, you don't have to do it the way everyone else is doing it. And that's one of the points that I'm going to try to continue to make. And so without drawing a lot of conclusions in what I'm going to talk to you about, it's really to create some reflection in your minds and some critical thinking about, all right, how can we, rather than just throwing all this out, how can we adapt it and design it in a way that meets the goals that we want to meet? And I'll use an example. I was going to touch on this later on, but it's hit my mind right now. It's Bimbo Bakeries. If you ever heard of it, it's a Mexican company. And now it's Grupo Bimbo in the US. Bimbo is sort of a funny name in English. But anyways, a lot of baked goods. They bought Sara Lee. They bought Intinamins. If you eat Takis or your grandkids or kids eat Takis, they own Takis. So a lot of it's a massive company, family-owned business from a Catholic family. Two things I want to mention about this. This is regards to their culture. I coach a good number of people in leadership roles in Bimbo. And what's impressive to me is just how their DNA and their culture is very clear from the top all the way down to the person that's most recently been hired. They do an excellent job with their culture, with their DNA, and a lot of clarity around this. And something else that they do, and this is very interesting, is that all of their leadership has to go through Catholic social doctrine teaching. I don't think they frame it as such. In other words, they don't call it that, but essentially that's what it all is. It's about the dignity of the human person, the dignity of work, and then all the principles of Catholic social doctrine. So they do an excellent job. And then they also do an excellent job with their DE&I. They don't follow the mainstream DE&I, but it's all based around dignity of the human person and everything that I've sort of talked about around equality and empathy and innovation. So it can be done in a big company like this that is doing it very successfully. But going back to when I participated in the certification program, there was a sense of perplexity in the participants when I showed up on camera. Right, a heterosexual white male, what they would call a cisgender male. What's he doing participating in this training? which I found a bit contradictory. It spoke to me directly to the contradiction of the purpose and intent of the program, to promote diversity and inclusion and to offer access of equal opportunity to all. But I sort of came up against all this resistance in the group. And that's sort of when D&I is not properly framed, that's also what it does. It makes people feel left out when that's not what it's meant to do. And so the same biases that they call out seem to be very present in that training, or at least in the participants. And these biases, they're present in all of us. So I'm passionate a passionate promoter about the holistic approach to D&I because we all have blind spots. We all have biases, we all have unconscious biases, because that's how the human mind works. Now, I know that can be weaponized or used, and you are biased and you have prejudice. Well, we all do. So, I think we have to own that, just because that's the way we're wired as human beings. So we can all do better. We can all try to uncover those blind spots, uncover those biases, learn where our prejudices might be unconsciously present or consciously present, and how to deal with those. The mind longs for safety and security. And so we perceive things that are new or things that are unknown as uncomfortable and as a threat. And so the mind leans on what they call heuristics, which are these mental shortcuts in decision-making to arrive at quick judgments. This is helpful, when we're in a fast-paced situation. However, it can be detrimental as the results or conclusions that we can draw through heuristics or through these mental shortcuts can oftentimes be inaccurate or irrational. And I want to call this out because it's just important that we're all aware that this is the way the mind works, and so we have to be attentive that we're not drawing erroneous or inaccurate conclusions. So we all have natural biases. Oftentimes they're unconscious. We don't even know they exist. We have prejudices. We make mental shortcuts. We also, as human beings, we all think that we are perfectly self-aware. Yet we're not. Self-awareness is a journey. Life is a journey of self-discovery and growing in self-awareness. You may have heard of the Johari window. If you haven't, I'll also put that in the notes. You know, Johari window has 4 panes, and it divides into these 4 panes, which is what is known to me and to others. What is not known to me, but it's known to others about me. What is known to me, but unknown to others. And then there's that pane that's everything that's unknown to me and it's unknown to others. So in psychology, they use that pane a lot in different exercises that you can do. But the fact is that there's things that we don't know about ourselves that others probably perceive about us. There's things that we know about ourselves that others don't know about us. There's things that we all know about us and other people know about us, but then there's a lot of unknowns. So the training that I did with the Institute of Diversity, in my view, is very exhaustive and very professional. You know, it requires an academic paper at the end. It requires a very in-depth exam. So they're very serious about their approach to this. It's not just you walk in, get a quick certificate, which is some other organizations, that's what they do. And so I want to run through really quick, and this isn't what this is about, but I just want to run through real quick the 15 topics, sort of modules that they go through. Personal awareness and continual learning. Bias in people policies and in people practices. Boardroom diversity. So I'm going through this just so that you understand what good diversity training includes. What are some of the topics? And the 4th topic is connecting demographic shifts to organizational strategy. Topic 5 is executive commitment and sponsorship for DEI initiatives and strategies. So now that we're bringing, the leadership really has to be in on this and very much committed and sponsor these initiatives. Number 6 is global best practices for an inclusive culture. So what are best practices? Number 7 is how can DEI improve the bottom line, which from a business perspective is really important. How DEI can help innovation. Topic number 9 is managing the DEI talent life cycle. Topic 10 is a topic that often comes out, you know, the race, power, and privilege. Again, when framed properly, it's just from a historical and cultural lens, it's an important topic to talk about. And number 11, strategic purpose and partnerships. 12, supplier diversity. Number 13, the elements of leading a large-scale DEI initiative. Number 14, integrating culture amidst mergers and acquisitions. Huge topic when companies come together. And then the last topic was advanced data insights and analysis. I mentioned that just so you understand that there are programs out there that are highly in-depth and professional when dealing with this topic. Now, there's other programs that are very superficial. You know, when doing my my master's in psychology of leadership at Penn State, I went through an elective course on diversity in the workplace, which I found very informative and wholesome, in my view. You know, it was taught by a woman of color, and it just laid out from a human resources perspective, it was the layers of diversity, race, ethnicity, and national origin, women, sexual orientation and gender, sexual harassment in the workplace, discrimination, and how also in that topic, how DEI can be used as discrimination, religion in the workplace, veterans, disability in the workplace, cultural differences, and then just general terms of diversity. And the professor, you know, again, a woman of color, made an excellent point. She said, mainstream diversity training enforces labels, enforces people to see the parts and not the whole. And she gave an example of a company that DEI training caused a lot of lawsuits, a lot of friction, tension, and conflict and problems in the workforce. And that company switched from DEI training, they switched to training around communication, around listening, around having difficult conversations, the ability to see and value others in their totality. And by doing that, labels disappeared and people began to feel seen, valued, and included. And that's sort of one of the unwanted consequences of mainstream or unhealthy DEI training is that it all of a sudden puts a lot of labels out there. And you're looking at parts of a person and not their totality. And we know from our Christian and Catholic anthropology that it's so important to look at the totality of the person. So in my view, one of the principal intents of holistic and healthy DEI is to increase awareness, to increase our consciousness about oneself and about others, to increase meaningful conversations, to broaden our horizons, and therefore to decrease the power of biases and prejudices in our minds and hearts. By increasing more awareness around this, then we just naturally give biases and prejudices, natural biases and prejudices, less power in our mind. So this is really, something we could talk about cultural intelligence, we could talk about emotional intelligence, social intelligence. It's growing in all of those areas. Another reason I'm passionate about this topic is because of the beauty and dignity, as all of you well know, of the human person. As long as another human being existed, diversity has existed. There's existed someone different than me who was also looking for a relationship, who was also looking for a sense of belonging, who was also looking for justice, who was also looking to be seen, to be listened to be understood, to be valued and appreciated. So diversity is not a new topic. Also, Penn State, they offered a complimentary certificate course on diversity, which was complimentary. I said, well, why not? I'm interested in this topic. So I jumped into it. And the first few minutes of the first session revealed another approach, right? The facilitator of the course, and this is what a lot of people would see in mainstream diversity, the facilitator of the course began by laying out the foundations for DE&I. And listen to this. The first principle that they bring up was this: we are all born into oppression, right? And so that's the foundational, and that's a very dangerous foundation, first of all, because it rings of Marxism, rings of the clash of the classes, and then it means that we are all victims, and then it's the powerful against the powerless. So obviously, where will that lead to if that's the foundational principle of DE&I? It's going to lead to violence. It's going to lead to clashes. And that's what we've seen. And that's what we've seen sort of in society, of when not properly framed DE&I training. Because that's really what's one of the principles that they begin with. We are all born into oppression, and so we need to free ourselves of oppression. And then, then they talk about what the depression, how it's defined, how the oppression is defined, what it looks like for everyone. So let's call out one of the elephants in the room. I already insinuated it, right? That DE&I is woke, right? First of all, let's define woke. Now, there's a lot of weight around this nowadays, a lot of energy, around wokeness and all this. We all know that woke is a term that came from the 1960s, right? And aligns in time and vocabulary with what people of color, more specifically the African American community, what they were suffering and how they spoke. Like, you got to be woke. This meant becoming a call to consciousness into action about being informed, about being educated, about being aware of social injustice and racial inequality. In other words, no longer just sitting back being a passive recipient of all this, but calling it out, becoming a bit more proactive. That's where the term comes. Now, I understand nowadays it's sort of at this broad stroke of just wokeism as everything that's sort of liberal, and as Bill Maher says, you can agree with him or not, but he says anything that's crazy, right? It's sort of, they're just the extremes, and it hasn't been good to our country, as we well know, because we're all divided into these opposite spectrums or extremes, and that's not healthy, because that's not where dialogue happens. But in the light of the original definition of woke, it strikes me as something that's very positive and necessary. Now, a newer use of this term, as I said, is more aligned with socialist and communist thought through Marxism, creating a divide among peoples, clash of the classes, clash between races, clash between genders, clash between sexual orientations, creating chaos. And then what does that lead to? It leads to big institutions, and big government has to step in to dictate. And that's not what subsidiarity is all about, is it? The Catholic social principle of subsidiarity. So philosophically, what this leads to a dictatorship of relativism, of political correctness, the dictatorship of subjectivism, of the individual hypersensitivity, and what I call the dictatorship of emotions. Now, emotions are important, but they don't have the only word or the final word in our human experience. And this leads to what we see in polarizations, these extremes. And both extremes are trying to protect values and principles. And I think it's important to recognize that. But there's very little space for meaningful dialogue. There seems to be intolerance on both sides. And so these extremes, they don't do themselves any favors in the public discourse because they can become petty, they can become soundbite-ish, they can lack depth, they can become silos, they can become echo chambers where we're just feed ourselves on people that we agree with. And that's doesn't make for intelligent conversation and curiosity. So this makes us hunker down with like-minded people and self-protect. It's natural that that happens. But as Catholics, we must remember that the church has always striven to be in dialogue with the world, to be in dialogue with culture, to be in dialogue with the trends and tendencies, because we are called to evangelize those trends and tendencies in that culture. We're called to bring the gospel, to bring values and perennial truths, gospel values to the public discourse. So if we hunker down into our own circles, we're not doing that. So perhaps another way to view my thoughts here is how to evangelize in a healthy way through, not proselytize, but how to evangelize through wholesome and healthy DE&I practices. Now, is it true that some training and framing of DE&I is experienced as divisive, exclusive, enraging, and ideological? Another DE&I acronym. Divisive, exclusive, enraging, and ideological. Yes, it's true. But the danger is that approach ends up contradicting itself because it creates division, it creates anger, it creates exclusion, and it creates a great lack of respect and lack of tolerance. And this approach, in my view, this approach has lost some of the greatest allies to the DE&I initiative. Who's been lost? A large number of women have been lost, white, brown, and black. Men oftentimes have been lost as allies to this because they've just been turned off, because they were painted as bad ones. A high percentage of white males, a whole bunch of conservative-leaning people, and many senior executives. All of these people that could be allies to a healthy and wholesome DE&I initiative, they were all sort of lost because of the way it was approached and framed. So it ended up doing what it was, the opposite of what it was meant to do. Well, the two things we're going to do now is we're going to step into very briefly the Catholic Christian social doctrine principles, and then I'm going to tie in the terms of diversity and equity inclusion with those to see how they're linked, and then we'll draw and then give a few conclusive thoughts. Everybody with me? We're okay? Very good. So as you know, the social Catholic, without getting into all the principles, I'm going to really highlight some of the principles that have to do with what we're talking about. The inherent dignity of the human person. The mere fact that a human person exists, created in the image of God, created as a subject, not as an object. And a person is a human person in all their expressions, races, cultures, colors, and nowadays also with sexual orientation, the human person has dignity. And this is something that we always have to stand up for and defend. And I have always seen the Catholic Church as a defender of the dignity of the human person. And the second principle is the common good. Then we're going to tie all of this into DE&I. But dignity of the human person, the principle of common good, the principle of the universal destination of goods, that all people have a right to access the level of well-being necessary for development. This can be linked somewhat to equality, as dignity can be linked to equality. Also, this can be linked to equity. And participation, the right to participation. This is often linked to government, but I think it's just, as human beings, we want to participate in organizations. We want to participate in community. We want to participate in society and in government. And then we know that another principle is also equality, because of the dignity, right? The equality of dignity, and yes, equality of opportunity. The people have opportunities. Another principle of Catholic social doctrine is solidarity, which is really this unity among human beings. Because of our dignity, because of who we are, that we can live in unity. which means love, which means understanding, which means peace, and all of those other things that we could talk about. And I want to quote something from a church's document that says, the message of the church's social doctrine regarding solidarity clearly shows that there exists an intimate bond between solidarity and the common good, between solidarity and the universal destination of goods, between solidarity and equality among men, women, and peoples, between solidarity and peace in the world. So a lot of DE&I training, a lot of the social doctrine is that finds it's a lot of meaning in just solidarity. And then another principle is subsidiarity, as we've already mentioned, which is really that things, social and political issues should be dealt with at the most immediate or local level. Keeping that, the big organization or big government doesn't get involved in the smaller things. Now, equity is a term that can sometimes get misunderstood depending on how you define it. It's defined in different ways and to meet really what someone wants to achieve. But equity can be understood as the equality of results, right? And that's not necessarily the best approach. It's not helpful. In other words, everyone should have access to the same results. No, we should all have access to, in the way I want to define it here, is equity is equality of opportunity. So in organization and society, we naturally, there's some classes or some people that have easier access to things. So in society and in organization, we want to make sure that we are trying to give access to other people that don't have such ease of access. Now, does it mean that that things are given away? No. But it's still based on merit, of course, and skills and talent and all that, yes. But yes, we want to make an effort that people that wouldn't have such easy access can at least have the opportunity. And in equity, when it's understood like this, is understood under the umbrella of the church's social doctrine of justice. That we have access to opportunities. In society, as I already said, naturally, some of us have easier access to opportunities than others. And in the workplace, this means that we just need to be more creative in how we recruit and how we select talent. Because it could be that we are using a very narrow pool. And it could be that we're going to find even better talent in other pools, but that we may not have easy access to, or they might not have easy access to the recruitment process. And so this requires a lot more creativity, which in the technical world, I think that we are very able to do this. So in essence, when we look at the social doctrine of the church, in essence, we all have a fundamental need to be seen for who we are. And we all want respect. And respect comes from a Latin word, which is that ability to gaze at someone. In other words, to see them for who they are, and sort of respect. In other words, that ability to look again at someone. Not once, but look again, to look and to behold that person. That's where respect comes from. And I love that meaning from the Latin, because it's just that ability to look at the wholeness, the totality of the human person. We have a fundamental need as human beings to be seen for who we are. We also have a fundamental need to belong. And this belonging begins inside of ourselves, first of all, to feel that we belong to ourselves, that we accept ourselves. And then that we are accepted and we belong to human groups and to community, the smallest community being the family. And I think, I want a lot of leadership coaching that I do with individuals, and I bring this to them. I said, in your personal life, in your professional life, this is going to be if you do this, you're halfway there to success in your personal and professional life. If the people around you feel that they are seen, that they are listened to, and that they are understood, that they are appreciated, valued, and acknowledged, you won half the battle of leadership. Because we're satisfying just those basic needs of the human person. We all want to be seen, listened to, understood, the sense that we're understood, valued, appreciated, and acknowledged. That's just a little nugget that might be helpful for you in your personal and professional lives. If you do that at home, and if you do that in the workplace, the battle's half won. And I think deep down, this is what diversity, equity, inclusion is all about. is about these fundamental needs of the human person. One of the, and I'm going to call out this out before we step into diversity, equity, inclusion as such, and linking it to social doctrine of the church. One of the major problems, in my view, and contradictions in the DE&I space are the metrics. Because when we talk about diversity, we talk about surface level diversity and deep level diversity. And really, the real approach of the authentic approach to diversity and inclusion, it's all about the deep level diversity. But what do the metrics measure? Only what we would call the surface level diversity. In other words, only what's visible. Where you come from, color of your skin, nowadays also the sexual orientation. But these are the things that they measure. But they preach and measure the diversity is all about, it's so much more. It's about cognitive diversity, it's backgrounds, it's about education, it's about so many different things. But the metrics are very limited and they measure. So the metrics don't do justice to what diversity, I think, what it's supposed to be doing. And I see that as a deep contradiction and not helpful. I think we need to improve the metrics. So now let's get into the principles now of diversity, equity, inclusion. We've said it a million times, but we're just going to break it down for you real quick. What is diversity? Okay, and when we talk about diversity, it's directly linked to the dignity of the human person and all of its expressions. It's also directly linked to participation, directly linked to some of the Catholic principles that I've mentioned above of the social doctrine. So diversity is this collection of unique attributes, traits, and characteristics that make up an individual. We're human beings, we are complex. And I call it the beautiful complexity of the human person. We have values, we have beliefs, we have background, we have likes, we have dislikes, we have ethnicity, we have culture, we have gender, we have abilities, we have socioeconomic status, we have age, physical appearance. Some of these things are visible and others are invisible. And when we use the image of an iceberg that's used as an example for many topics, especially in psychology and personality, in the same thing in diversity, we have the surface, which is what the metrics is around, but we know that diversity is about so much more. About so many things that aren't seen. So we're going to divide this into the 4 dimensions of diversity. The first dimension is personality. And we have different tools. We have the 16 personality styles. We have DISC, we have Myers-Briggs, we have the Big 5, which breaks Big 5 factor, which breaks the personality down into 5 categories: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Don't worry, you don't need to take notes about this. I'm just calling this out. Right? This is the first dimension, is personality, who we are as persons, how we're wired. Right? And it's very much of how we're born. Second dimension is then sort of what they would call, the first is personality, second is what they're called primary, so it's age, gender. Then nowadays a lot of talk around sexual orientation, physical ability, ethnicity, and race. That will be the primary, the second dimension. The third dimension, which we would call the secondary, is geographical location, your income, your habits, your recreational habits, your religion, your educational background, your educational level, work experience, your appearance, parental status, marital status. I know I'm throwing out a lot of information here, but I didn't, with this presentation, I didn't expect to answer all your questions or resolve too many things in your life, just to get your brains moving and thinking about this. The fourth dimension in diversity is organization. And in an organization, you have a functional level, you work in a different sector, you have seniority or not, your work location, your union affiliation, your management status, things like that. So as we can see, that's a big topic. Diverse, all these things that make up who we are as human beings. But in my view, it goes back to the dignity of who we are as people and how we use that dignity and how we serve that dignity. And your dignity, you have as much dignity as the person in the screen next to you. The next point, equity. Now, equity is linked, in my view, to the social doctrines around equality, participation, universal destination of goods, solidarity, and opportunity. So it's about having access to the same resources and opportunities. So equality of opportunity. And D&I sometimes gets this confused. than mainstream D&I, because they confuse it with, equity means that, well, all people, we sort of have to prop all these people up, or we have to give away opportunities. And the danger here is what we would call someone in an organization who is hired to fulfill a number, what they would call a token, DE&I token in the organization, which is offensive to the person because they weren't hired on their, on who they are, but because of some D&I metric. And it's offensive to the people around, but then it's also offensive how that person can be perceived. Now, I've heard this often. Oh, you're the DE&I token. You were hired because we have to fulfill a certain number, whether it be a women, whether it be sexual orientation, whether it be people of color, whether it be white, or whatever it is. But again, that's totally against dignity, in my view. So that's how it can be used in a not healthy way. So when we're talking about the deeper level, is that equality is all about equality of dignity, equality of rights and responsibility, in rights and responsibility in our diversity and in our differences. Equity is part of, when we talked about in social doctrine of the church, justice. Receiving what is due to us in our situation, meeting our needs and aspirations. Justice is about having access to opportunity. But again, it's not about giving it away. But yes, as a society, we can be much more creative and we can facilitate better access to opportunity. The danger with equity is that, as I already mentioned around Marxism, is that there's some subtle Marxist principles that can get tied into equity, which is we're born into oppression, and therefore we're born into injustice, and therefore we are victims, and therefore we have to fight the system, or things have to be given to them. And it sounds good. It sounds good in the sense that we all must have access to the same. Socially, it sounds like a nice principle. But it can be, it can be a very subtle, slippery slope to communism and socialism, where in the end, where big government takes control. Another danger here is what I already mentioned, is that misunderstood equity can bring about unwanted or unexpected discrimination. In other words, to fill a certain number or to fill certain metrics, we discriminate against other people. And this is what happens a lot. And there's a lot of legal cases. And when D&I is not properly implemented, there's a lot of legal cases because of this, where people have been discriminated against because they didn't fit the D&I metrics. The last point here is then inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is linked to participation, it's linked to solidarity in Catholic doctrine, and it's linked to the common good. Being a valued and active participant in an organization, community, or team. And this is inclusion and I like the other term of belonging. And in the end, as human beings, we want to feel that we belong. Now, I'm going to go on a little side track here, but is it a workplace? Is it a company's responsibility to fill all the needs of a human person? No. Is it a company's responsibility to make sure that the people have 100% sense of belonging? No. At work, it's only one aspect of our life. And in the end, it's a professional transaction. You offer me your time and services, and you get compensated for that. But in the complex workforce and the way society has evolved, has been, before, again, it was just a professional transaction. Nowadays, because people spend so much time at work and because society has become fragmented in so many ways, there's a lot of research that said, well, when our people feel that they belong, when our people feel seen and valued, appreciated, well-being improves. When well-being improves, also performance and production improves. So in the end, everyone's winning. And so that's why it's become so important. And in my view, it's also become important because we come back to the dignity of the human person. And we're treating people as subjects and not as objects. But we also want to be careful with the extremes. The workplace has to fulfill all the needs of the human person. No, it's not meant to do that. But that can help human people it can help humans live their dignity and find greater well-being. And of course, and that's where this a healthy diversity, equity, inclusion policies can really help people do this. So we go back to the other acronym which I use: dignity, empathy, and innovation. So we want to remember, that's another D&I acronym. We want D&I that is about dignity, equality, and empathy, and innovation. Dignity, that each person possesses an intrinsic dignity. Because you exist, you possess intrinsic dignity. That you are a subject, not an object. You have essential and intrinsic worth and worthiness. In other words, you have value in and of itself due to who you are, and not just how you look or what you do. Secondly, equality and empathy, which is about equality of dignity, equality of opportunity, and empathy. This is such an important topic in my view, is especially also as Catholics and Christians, is that ability to love, right? Empathy is the ability to connect with and try to understand someone's situation, to sit with them in their situation. Now, there's 3 levels of empathy. In other words, because sometimes we can strive to be empathetic with someone, but we haven't gone through what they're going through, perhaps. So we have cognitive empathy. In other words, I strive to understand your perspective and what you're going through. We have emotive empathy, which is maybe I've been through something similar to you, so I can somewhat feel with you. I can sit with you in those feelings or in that emotional state. I understand what you're going through. And then empathic action. Now, I might not totally understand, but I take action to try to walk with you in whatever you're going through. Now, I want a quick parenthesis here with this. I have this picture here, and I love this because this picture has a story. This picture, the short version of the story, is that this picture was taken by a blind person. There's a foundation that I support here in Mexico called Ojos que Sienten, Eyes That Feel. And they support blind people, visually impaired. And some of the blind people, from a very early age, they wanted to be photographers. So there's a group of them that dedicate their time to the hobby of photography. Now, in our minds, that's where what sort of like those biases and prejudices go. How can a blind person take pictures? But that's what they do. And so I went to this, you go to this event called the Dinner in Darkness, where they create this space of total pitch darkness. And you have a 3-course meal. And at the end, and then there's waiters and waitresses that lead you through the experience. And halfway through the meal, there's like this puzzle or sort of activity that a table of 8 or 10 people have to put together without being able to see. So really, it connects you with your other senses in a way that you've never been connected before. And the people the waitresses and waiters, they're blind. And it's the blind, they lead us through this experience. So that's empathic action makes me remember this experience. To live what at least it's just for a small moment of time to live what they live. And, and when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, it's an amazing exercise, an amazing experience to do this, because it's all about bias, it's all about prejudice, it's all about connecting with people, people that have different abilities or lack some abilities that we have. And in my view, those are holistic and wholesome ways to approach this topic. So very powerful story. If you want a powerful experience and a very challenging experience, this is something to do. I went through it twice. I was very challenged. It's very uncomfortable, but there's so much wisdom in it. And all of this, when we go, so we talk about innovation, dignity, equity, and empathy, and then innovation. In other words, when we have a diverse workforce and when we're creative in the way that we find a diverse workforce, not just based on the normal metrics, but on a deeper diversity, we can innovate processes, we can innovate possibilities, but also means that we have to innovate ways that we hire, innovate ways that we select talent to bring about a deeper level of diversity. I could come into a boardroom that everyone looks the same, but there's a deep diversity in the boardroom. I could go into a boardroom where everyone looks very different, but it could be that there's very little diversity. because they all come from the same background, so same whatever. So it's not as easy as sometimes it's painted. Now, and when a lot of this, when it's brought down into an organization, it leads to another common topic, and I won't get into it, but common topic is what nowadays they talk a lot about psychological safety. I'm a big fan of this, but again, it has to be promoted in the proper way. Yeah, because when there's psychological safety, in other words, where people feel safe, they feel that they can exist and that their dignity is honored and they're seen and valued and and there's a sense of belonging, then so many things happen. Right? There's so much innovation and creativity, then people are open to feedback. You know, people can give feedback to their leaders, and leaders can give feedback openly to their people. That enriches an environment and, you know, personal and professional growth. But when people don't feel safe, none of that, oftentimes that won't happen. You can't make mistakes, can't innovate, can't create, can't give feedback, because it's all going to be used against you. So in conclusion, as Catholic business executives, what I would like you to think about again is how you can make DE&I an effective instrument for improved culture, for a greater sense of dignity of the person and work, for better selection of talent, and how it can improve your bottom line. Essentially, how can you leverage a healthy and wholesome DE&I for good in your business, for good in your organization? And therefore, how can you frame and position DE&I for the end results that you want to achieve? This is what we want to achieve. How can DE&I help us do that? You want to improve talent recruitment selection? How can DE&I help us do that? We want to improve the bottom line. How can DE&I help us do that? We want to improve well-being in the workplace. How can healthy and holistic DE&I do that? Shabbat Toth, and I'll put this name in the notes. In a Forbes article, he's a good friend of mine, someone who I admire in the leadership space and in the cognitive diversity space, highlights that what people really want is a sense of safety, love, and belonging in the workplace. And isn't this so true? So how can we utilize a DE&I framework to improve a sense of love, dignity, justice, belonging in the workplace? And this is all about what Catholic social doctrine teaches. We very much can. Now, there's no prescribed way to do DE&I. You can call it diversity, equity, inclusion. You can call it diversity, inclusion, or you can call it dignity, equality, innovation. You can put the words, and there's no prescribed way to do it. But when we see DE&I as an ally for leading better, for serving better, and for growth as individuals and organizations, it can make a huge difference. But when we see DE&I as an enemy, well, we put ourselves in a difficult position. We might be losing something that's very good. Just have very clear what you want to achieve and design the DE&I training and education for your group accordingly. Or bring someone in that can design and deliver the training and education or consulting to meet those results that you want. So as Catholic business leaders, this can be an effective and constructive way to engage in dialogue with culture and with humanity, and it can be a very effective way to evangelize. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Matthew. That was awesome. What a beautiful integration of our spirituality and DEI and work and perspective. Probably a lot of us have not heard or experienced in that level. Thank you. 2 minutes, we're 12:28 here Central Time, and so let me just throw it out to anyone with a question. I think everybody is on mute, so if you have a question, not sure if we can see if you raise your hand or not, but
I do have a simple question for you, Matthew. This is Father Daniel. I've befriended a family of color over the last couple of years, and I ran into a situation recently where there were immediately some cultural baggage and way of looking at the world from that victim mentality that I touched a nerve, and they flew off the handle in an irrational way. So how do you deal with situations where people are, because of the triggers that they have from their background, their cultural training, certain way of looking at the world, that they're really easily triggered?
Thank you, Father Daniel. My view, and I think this is something that all of us can do, we just have to be intentional about it, is, and this isn't the only answer to your question, Father Daniel, is about talking to people whether people from different backgrounds that we're not familiar with, whether it be cultural backgrounds, whether it be color, whether it be women. And most of us here on the call are men. Because we can sort of try to conceptualize what they've been through by reading history and all this, but I think by talking to people and asking them what their experience is, we can better understand their sensitivities. And again, this is about broadening, this is about sort of getting rid of prejudices, but this also is broadening our own cultural experience and knowing people. And that's the simple answer that comes to mind. And I think that's something that we need to do intentionally on a regular basis, is to, because we think we understand people, but then something like that happens, like, holy smokes, what did I do? What did I say? You know, but there's a lot of history there. There's a lot of cultural experiences. There's the mindset. And then I think of asking people, just being a lot more curious. And I think we can do ourselves a lot of good, especially if we're in leadership roles, and we can serve our people better. That's why I put empathy in one of those acronyms, dignity, empathy, and innovation, because it's about trying to connect with people's realities. That would be my simple answer, Fabian, for that. Thank you for sharing that.
Matthew, I know you mentioned a few times of putting things in the chat, in the notes there, so we can go back and review those. But from a practical standpoint, I think a lot of people are either leading a company, own a company, or executives in a company that already have a DEI that's maybe a little bit of the wrong version. And they're looking to say, okay, now how do I, in a very practical way, how do I go in and influence and course correct, if you will? So I always like to boil it down. Is there anywhere in there like a list of do's and don'ts? Like, if you're doing this, consider that. And just how do you really, I think, through like the implementation part now?
Yes. The first answer that will come to my mind is, if you're in an organization where you're not totally on board with, if you're in a leadership role, but you're in an organization where maybe you're not totally on board with the way the DEI practices are preached or taught, first and foremost, I would try to become a promoter and sponsor. In other words, if they see you as an ally, not as an enemy, so that you can become part of the conversation, part of the dialogue, and then you can become part of the proposal. How about, what are we trying to achieve here? Then can we sort of frame this up in a different way to achieve that result? And I don't have a whole list of, right now, I don't have a list of do's and don'ts for you.
Yeah.
But I think that's one way that we can do it when we want to become part of the conversation, in my view.
Yeah, very good.